All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Coordinated Land Use Transportation Planning Task Force for North Texas. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. If you didn't catch the announcement earlier, we've got a little poll there that folks can participate in, asking about your experience on mixed-use development in your community. So if you wouldn't mind participating in that, that will give us some content to help our main theme presentations. I think we're ready then to, got some results already here. And Sydnee, do you think you could drop that in the chat as well for folks to grab that link?
Yeah, I can do that. 1 second.
Cool. So yeah, while she's doing that, just a reminder to everyone, this meeting is being recorded. We'll post that recording on our website later for you to access at your leisure. But while we're being recorded, please keep your microphones muted to help us preserve the audio quality during presentations. All right, so I think, Sydnee, you want to go ahead and just move forward to our next slide. Right, so as I mentioned, this is the Coordinated Land Use and Transportation Planning Task Force for North Texas, put together to share best practices, insights, and current topics and issues among local governments as it relates to advancing federal land uses that support transportation and transportation that support federal land uses. So I think if we go to our next slide, we have our quarterly schedule here for you. And as I mentioned, we meet quarterly. So this is July. We'll have one more meeting coming up later this year in October. So go ahead and pencil that in on your calendars, 2 p.m. on the 19th of October. And of course, all our content, past presentations on our website. So today we have a couple of local updates to start off. These are our sort of quick announcements of things that are ongoing, timely, or completed items. So we have City of Fort Worth talking about their Eastside transportation plan, and then council governments, we're going to share our work on looking at bikeway facilities and dark stations. And then our main theme for today is mixed use developments. And so we'll have Shawn with council governments talk about some regional elements of that. And we have City of Arlington, Carrollton, and Plano talking about various projects in their respective communities. After that, hopefully we'll have time for some discussion and then a few announcements that you'll want to stick around for and hear about. Okay, so our next item on the agenda is local updates. First, we have Kelly Porter with the City of Fort Worth. So whenever you're ready, Kelly, just let us know to go to next slides.
All right, so I'm Kelly Porter, I'm Assistant Director for Fort Worth Transportation Public Works Department. There's 5 of us or 6 of us in that department that are Assistant Directors, and I'm over the Regional Transportation Innovation Division. As part of our ongoing work with NCTCOG and Trinity Metro on East Lancaster, we've at first started with just what was going to be more of an alternative analysis for East Lancaster, but then that's broadened out with some of the discussions to being more of an Eastside transportation plan. So you can go to the next slide. You can go to the next slide. So the study area is a bit broader than just the corridor. Originally, we were, East Lancaster itself is up to its useful life. It's a very old roadway. It needs to be rebuilt. And so we want to be able to rebuild that to modern standards. It's also a TxDOT facility, and there's going to be use of federal dollars on it. So we also knew too that we're going to have to be able to go through the NEPA process on that to be able to get a alternative that would be taken into full environmental and construction eventually. With that being said, we've also got I-30, which COG and Tech started doing some work on to define what that cross section is going to look like with new managed lanes, high-speed rail from Cooper into downtown. And so it's a good opportunity to toggle back between, using Michael Morris's words, toggle between what happens on I-30 and what happens on East Lancaster. Something else to note is that the city has 2 facilities that parallel I-30 that serve as essentially frontage roads to it. And so we're going to be taking those through a bit of more of an abridged alternatives analysis to define what those are going to be. That's Brentwood Stair and Bridge Street. So we'll be able to not only update some of our local planning documents, including the thoroughfare plan, updating the zoning on these corridors and in this general area, but also hand off some work for TxDOT to be include in their environmental assessments for both, or excuse me, I should say environmental processes for both East Lancaster and Bridge Street, Brentwood Stair. Some of the improvements that will occur in this area, or some of the outcomes of the study, are going to be updates to the thoroughfare plan, the zoning, as I said before, the environmental documents, as well as economic development incentives to help drive development. This is not just a rebuild of a road. It's also a major transit corridor for the city of Fort Worth and the region. And in COG's long-range plan, I-30 is seen as a major regional transit corridor as well. So we want to capitalize on that asset as well. So we go to the next slide. I've kind of talked a bit about this before, but a lot of what this is going to do is develop alternatives for roadway cross sections on the 3 corridors I mentioned before. Transit is a big component of this. So we're specifically looking at high capacity transit. We haven't actually gone through a process to define that route and that mode, but we know that high capacity transit, since this is the busiest route in the city, we want to determine what high capacity or at least enhanced transit would look like along that corridor. Originally, the city was considering taking that route from just downtown over to the Hanley area near East Loop 820. Now the analysis is looking to go further to connect to the East Chase shopping area at I-30 and East Chase. That would also provide a potential connection between the regional transit on I-30 that'll go between Fort Worth and Dallas in the managed lanes, and whatever transit alternative comes out of this planning process. Of course, in addition to these alternatives, we'll be looking at just making the road more modern, more safe and multimodal. We're also going to be looking at street grid connections parallel to the facilities, so we can just enhance mobility as a whole. We'd rather have our lane miles distributed over a grid than all forced onto one arterial or a few arterials. We're going to be doing form-based code as part of this. That's not only on East Lancaster, but also at some of the key nodes in the study area and other amendments. And I've kind of mentioned the other 2 things before. This is, since TxDOT's at the table, we're going to be able to use some of this work to feed into their environmental process for East Lancaster and for I-30. Go to the next slide. So the reason why this process is different than some of the processes we've done before, essentially, there's been a lot of work done on our east side that have been everything from COG study, I believe it was back in 2016, 2017, that looked at East Lancaster. There's also been some work in the Woodhaven area on redevelopment. There's also been work completed on a TOD analysis along Lancaster, but we didn't have a mode or a route defined yet. So this is different because we're really going to take this through full public outreach, explain to people the process that it would take to get things constructed and funded. We plan on using those older or those other planning documents that preceded this to feed into this work. So we're not going to lose the work, but we do plan on really kind of bring it into a new process. We're going to go through a defense school alternatives analysis process so people can see how we got to the outcomes that we're getting to, that we will eventually get to later this year for the modes and the routes and the cross sections. We're also tying this back not just to nice pictures of what could be there or just the market analyses and general data like that, but we actually want adoptable form-based code and thoroughfare plan amendments from this. So it's actually going to be codified and taken all the way through. And then, of course, big thing for us is ensuring that we have a product that is funding ready and ready for design and construction. And we believe that we're getting there already since we got the $20 million raise grant for the corridor. Thank you, COG, for sending the application in for us. But we really think that we were successful this time around because we were actually going through this defensible process. So the federal government knew they were investing in. So factors we're going to be considering, you go to the next slide. Factors we're going to be considering for really all the corridors, but Lancaster specifically, we generally want to stay within the right of ways. We don't see this as being a huge expansion project, but we know for Lancaster, it's an antique road. And so there's going to be a lot of antiquities along it. We want to stay in the right of way as best we can. We also, if we're looking at, doing some quote unquote right sizing and other types of improvements, we also want to look at lane mile capacity for the whole system. So like I said before, maybe not all lane miles are on one corridor, but they're on parallel facilities, including on-street parking in there, thinking about technology and micro mobility and other modes like that. Ensuring that the cross-section could change along the way on all these corridors as the context of the land uses change. And then we really want to be able to ensure that TxDOT is comfortable that they're not losing capacity in the corridor as we're thinking about balancing out multimodal accommodations. Next slide. We're going into the alternatives analysis process pretty strong right now. And I have some graphics on the next few slides with some of the different alternatives. But to keep it simple, we're going to be having to do some calculations on looking at high, medium, and low ridership for the corridor just to understand what demand is going to be now and in the future based on current zoning and market constraints as we're thinking about how do we build a future-proof concept. We'll be looking at catalytic investment along the corridor. So we're focusing a lot on publicly owned sites as a means to potentially be able to partner with developers. I've already talked about future proofing. We want to ensure that as this corridor evolves and the planning efforts for this corridor and the policy, which really going to be some dramatic changes potentially for the corridor, that we're able to ensure that the investments we're putting in are going to be able to grow with the redevelopment of that corridor. And then you can go to the next slide. So these are just some of the cross sections that have been developed. Right now, we're still in the universe phase. This is just what fits in the corridor. And so whatever didn't fit within the current right-of-way of the corridor from downtown all the way out to the city limits, basically got thrown out. And then the next thing we'll do is to look at constructability. And so that's what our consultant team is working on to determine where the utilities, what are the right other constraints along the corridor, what can we feasibly build for the best cost benefit. So the segments that we're looking at right now are from Main to Riverside. And on the next slide, we have the universe from Riverside out to 820. And then on segment 3, looking through its historic Handley area. And then segment 4 is looking from that area out to the Arlington city limit. So right now we're just at a phase where we just figured out what can fit in the right of way and what's reasonable and what TxDOT feels comfortable with. And then from there, we're going to look at constructability so we can start to understand, okay, how will things actually operate with these cross sections and whatnot, and then go on the cost benefit to determine what may be the highest and best use for the dollars put into this corridor. The next slide. To date, we've already completed about 9 open houses, or excuse me, we've completed 3 open houses. The first round, we'll have 9 open houses completed at the end. We're also going to do it says visioning workshop here. We're going to call it solutions workshop. We're trying to make it where people don't think we're just coming out there just to draw pictures on the map, but it's actually going to be about solutions. What do you want your code? How do you want the thoroughfare plan updated? What are the types of things do you value and all that stuff, but try and get back to real policy. We've already got about 500 survey responses, which we're really excited about. They've done onboard bus surveys, so we think Trinity Metro for letting us partner with them on that. We've also done TV interviews, and we're doing a lot of outreach with the churches and with apartments and whatnot. So we're getting some really good feedback, and we're looking to do more. We just talked to our new council person. That's something I should have mentioned too. We have a new council district that's popped up in the last year, but the new council person's finally been on board. I think it's only been about a month that she's been on board. So we met with her this morning, so really excited about that. And then next steps, you can go to the next slide. We'll start around 2 of outreach later this summer. We're working on the existing conditions, the alternatives analysis portion right now. That's going to allow us to get a good alternative to take to council in November. And then we're going to do a community solutions workshop next winter so we can kind of build the land uses around that alternative. And then we'll do 1 more round of outreach. So it'll be a 2-step adoption process for our council. 1 will be preferred alternative that we'll take to TxDOT that they can start developing. And then the next piece will be the full plan with the code and all those other good things in it. And then the next slide, it's just the QR codes that we've been using. We're also doing a study on East Berry Street. And so we've been kind of co-marketing these meetings together and the outreach and the survey since they're both on the east side. And that's it. So I'm Kelly Porter. If you have any questions, you can always call or email me. And then Mike Lambic, who's sitting next to me, is transportation, multimodal planning manager or transportation planning manager, whatever he wants to go by today. But he's on my team and is serving as our day-to-day project manager. That's it.
Thanks, Kelly. Are there any questions from the group for Kelly, clarifications? Guidance? All right, not seeing anything light up in the room. We appreciate you guys sharing this. It's very interesting to see that there's also that consideration of the land use element here with this improvement. So look forward to seeing the outcomes. All right, Daniel, are you ready to chat about
I am.
what we're doing?
Yeah. All right. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Daniel Snyder. I'm a senior transportation planner with the Council of Governments, where I specialize in active transportation. And today I just want to give you a sneak peek into a study that COG has initiated, in which a consultant will be hired to evaluate connections for bicyclists to various Silver Line and Orange Line rail stations, as well as the Cotton Belt. So with that, we can go on to the next slide, please, Sydnee. So before I go into the scope of work, I want to provide kind of a brief background and kind of explain the timeliness behind this study. As most of you are probably already well aware, the Silver Line is under construction from Plano to DFW Airport. What some of you may not be aware of is that the Cotton Belt Trail is also under construction parallel to Silver Line. So the Cotton Belt Trail is a paved off-street path that will serve as a great spine network connecting all the various Silver Line stations. However, the main purpose of this study is primarily to look at those perpendicular connections for bicyclists, enabled to allow them to get to the rail stations and to the Cotton Belt Trail as well. Also, in terms of timeliness, COG has been working with the city of Irving on their first city bike plan. So this study is going to serve as a great momentum for them to start to implement the plan that has already identified connections to various Orange Line stations in the city. Next slide, please. So overall, there are 10 corridors that will be evaluated. Addison, Carrollton, Dallas, Irving, and Plano. Essentially, the consultant will look at various factors of the roadway characteristics, speeds, lanes, heavy vehicles, among various others. And we'll develop several options for bicycle facility types to choose from. The great news here is city staff have already expressed interest in these corridors for bike facilities because they believe that they are over capacity and therefore can accommodate bicycle facilities. The final deliverable will be 15% concept plans for the next phase. And for a first for COG, I believe, will be 2 short-term pilot projects. So these are going to serve as demonstration projects for 2 corridors that will serve to basically prove that the bicycle facility concepts can, in fact, work well in those particular locations. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through these corridors real quick. However, I just want to highlight that, there's Addison Road in the town of Addison. This corridor is on the east side of the airport, where there's quite a bit of warehousing and heavy vehicles. Addison is also the home of Kaboom Town on the 4th of July, where there's an influx of traffic. So city staff are certainly concerned about making sure that intersections will function properly with the addition of a bicycle facility. Knoll Trail Drive will also be evaluated in Dallas, connecting to the Knoll Trail Station, Silver Line. And this particular corridor will be a really important connection for bicyclists because there will be no parking available at Knoll Trail, and therefore enabling other options to travel to Knoll Trail will be very important. As well as Davenport Road further to the east in Dallas, that will connect the Marnie Keener Trail to the Cotton Belt Trail. Along that corridor are 2 schools, so as well as on-street residential parking. So the consultant will have to take those into consideration as well. Next slide, please. The Cotton Belt Trail will deviate from the Silver Line at various points along the corridor. In Carrollton, it will connect to the Purple Trail. So part of this effort will be to identify the side paths connecting along Kelly Boulevard. crossing Hutton Branch and connecting to the Purple Trail as well. Next slide, please. Various corridors have been identified in Irving. They have 4 Orange Line rail stations to connect to as well, serving the mixed use locations of the Las Colinas Urban Center, as well as near North Lake College as well, further north towards the Hidden Ridge Station. North Lake College, sorry. Next slide, please. In Plano, the consultant will be looking at Municipal Ave. This will connect to the 12th Street Silver Line Station. And as part of this corridor study, they'll also be identifying some kind of local connection through north of downtown Plano that will also connect to the downtown Plano station as well. Next slide, please. And so for this project, we'll be kicking off in the next few months. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
All right, thanks, Daniel. And I think we'll take a minute to wait for any questions. Thanks, Daniel, for letting us know about things that's going to really support transit-on development around these stations and make those connections. Very interesting stuff. Hopefully, folks from this group have sort of got some inspiration or ideas for local updates. If you in the future have a project or something about your community you'd like to share, quick update on at this group, we're happy to accommodate that. So just send us an email and let us know. I think we're now ready to talk about our main theme. So Shawn, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thanks, Travis, and thank you everyone for joining us again. So we'll go into the presentations around our theme, mixed use development in North Texas. We have 3 presenters. If you have any burning quick questions right after each of the presentations, feel free to jump in. Otherwise, we'll have time at the end of the presentations for panel questions, and we can have some discussion at that time. And of course, you should feel free to insert questions in the chat at any time. So our first presenter is Gincy Thoppil. She is at the City of Arlington Planning and Development Services Director Center.
Hi there. Good afternoon, everyone. I don't see my presentation up yet.
Shawn, I thought you were going to go through your section first.
Well, while we're looking at that, I can kind of try giving you all a context of where this location is. So I'm going to talk about a mixed-use development or building that we have in the downtown core of Arlington. So it's right across from City Hall. And so Abrams Street, Center Street, Mesquite Street, and Main Street is what we have where this site is located. So it's a whole block, 4 street frontages that we are talking about. So when this project came to us in 2015, and I just put it that it was built in 2018. So our first mixed use building in downtown Arlington, it's called 101 Center. I think from that building name is where that whole trend started in Arlington to name buildings after the street address. So 101 Center kind of built that popularity in Arlington to start using that as the names of the buildings. If we move to the next slide, please. All right, I was talking to you about the site. So this was 2015, and I pull that aerial so you know what it looked like at that time. We have City Hall, and then on its east was the library building. So that library site is where this building has now gone in. There was a lot of changes that we were thinking about at that time. We had the whole Abrams Street itself there was a whole redesign effort going on. So we hadn't completely designed it by that time, but we had started that process of going through a consultant. So there was that going on at that time. The library, we were going to demolish that library and actually move the library into the City Hall site where you see the parking on the north of City Hall. That parking was going to be taken out and we wanted to build a library. So there was a library design effort also going on at the same time. Additionally, we had our council chamber that was going to be also demolished, which is that slight finger that you see coming out of the City Hall building. That's the council chamber. So that was going to come out, and something else, a new building for that was supposed to come there too. So if you go to the next, and you on this slide, there's also the railroad that you can see on the north side. So that's kind of the context we are working with. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is the plat piece, and I put that because a lot of you are planners here and you'll kind of appreciate what we are talking about here. So this is the old town plat for Arlington, the original town of Arlington. That's the plat name. And so if you look at it, it has lots of these little lots being created for the City Hall site. And then on the library side, there is a street that's there. There is a railroad easement on the top. Abram Street is not built to the full, so there's going to be dedication for that. So encore easements had to be taken. So there's a lot of site development-wise. There were quite a bit of constraints in terms of what's around it. As I already mentioned to you, we were in the process of Abram Street redesign. So that timing was also causing some concerns in this development design. So when the developer came to us, and the developer is Catalyst Urban, and they, y'all probably know Paris Rutherford, very well-known planner in the Metroplex. So he's the one who came to us. He was one of our strategic planning consultants for the Division Street corridor strategy that we did. And that was in 2015 or 2014, I think. So right after that is when he came with this development. So Abram Street redesign was the thought at that time was we wanted to do a road diet, and the parking, the on-street parking on Abram Street, at least for the core downtown area, will be reversed angled parking. So that was another twist for this developer when we were trying to work on his plans. I talked about the Encore transformer location, and why the Encore transformer locations for this one was difficult, because we were already working on the Abram Street design, and that would also dictate a lot of the transformer locations there. Talked about the railroad easement, abandonment of existing Main Street. We did need parking because we were going to lose a lot of public parking in these whole projects. Since the library was moving to the other side, we were losing the City Hall parking. And then in the place of the library there also, we had a lot of surface parking. So that whole thing was going to be lost. So there was this need of how do we create more public parking? So I'll come up with what the solutions and how the win-win kind of worked out for both the developer and the city. Also, we did want city was in need of a grocery store in downtown. That was something that our residents had been asking for a long time. We didn't have enough housing density in downtown at that time where a grocery store would actually have that market demand to come in. So that was another thing in our minds that we need to get there. So next slide, please. So this is what it looks like in 2018 when the building was completed. So the building is a 6-story building with the ground floor along Abram and Mesquite and Center having some retail, and then live work units on both Center and Mesquite side. And then a parking garage on the north side of the building. That's the parking garage, and that is a 5-story parking garage there with a roof deck. So how did this building really even come about? A lot of public partnership that went on. This was city-owned property, so it is still owned by the city. So it's a ground lease that we have done with the developer for about 24 years, that they can ask for another extension, but it is a 24-year lease term ground lease term that we have with the developer. Now, after so the master agreement has that ground lease, but also has city renting spaces from the development. So the developer built the parking garage, but about 440 spaces in the garage are also rented out by the city, and we do pay monthly rent for per space basis. So that is something that we have from the developer. So there's a rental piece that we have. And then, of course, the retail that comes, that's definitely going to produce sales tax and everything for us. So tours, we did have a downtown tours, and we do have it right now. And so the tours was able to provide for the streetscape portion, which is the hardscape and the plantings. The street frontage landscaping that was done, that maintenance was taken over by the city. So the city is going to maintain that. The environmental remediation, the demolition of the library building, all that was paid from the city side. The construction of the parking garage itself was paid by the city. And then some of the surface parking areas, on-street parking areas that you see along the 3 street frontages, actually 4 street frontages, that's also paid by the city. So about $7.5 million is what the city put into this project, and then the rest of it came from the developer side. Next slide, please. So as I said, lots of other changes were being looked at, were being designed at that time. So Abram Street was complete, and then this is a November 2020 aerial map. If you look at where the Founders Plaza, which also has a Levitt Pavilion. So there is a whole seamless type of a hardscape that is done from the Founders Plaza all the way up to the front of the City Hall. It's very well done, and during nighttime, there are 4 piers of the really tall piers with different lights, and the lights reflect what's going on in the city at that time. We can close it off. That becomes like a whole pedestrian area that could be utilized. On the bottom right portion that you see on your slide, you see another development popping up. That is Park Place, and that's a student housing project, about 80 units per acre density. So that was just kind of following the footsteps of 101 Center and just kind of watching. And as soon as they were almost complete, Park Place started their project. And as you can see on the north of City Hall, the library building was built, the council chamber was built, and the city center plaza between the library and the City Hall was also built. Next slide, please. So how did this whole thing, to talk about the process part of it, I gave you some economics part of it, but the approval piece of it, this is in the downtown business zoning district, and in the downtown business zoning district, we do allow for a lot more density bonuses. Typically, everywhere else in the city, it's only 22 units per acre that we would give for a multifamily structure. But here, if you had a multifamily building, you could get up to 60 units per acre. Now, if you go anything more than 60 units per acre, and you could get up to 100 units per acre, so between that 60 to 100 to get there, you would have to make it as a mixed use building. And so that was our way of trying to insert into our ordinances that, hey, we are looking for mixed use buildings in the downtown core. Here's an incentive that we can provide you developers. We can give you a lot more density if you create a mixed use building. And the second use, the non-residential use, must occupy at least 15% of the gross floor area of the building. No height limitations for building. All of that was taken out from the downtown business zoning district. So what the developer did was he wanted to get more than 60 units per acre. Actually, he's like about 63 or 64 units per acre. So not a whole lot of jump from 60, but I did want to go above 60. So he thought of doing it as a mixed use development. He always wanted to do it as mixed use development, but now that he's tied to this condition of at least 15% of gross floor area of building, he had to design it accordingly. And if he designed it accordingly, meeting our standards, then the process would be an administrative process, as easy as submit a site plan, then the building permit, and you can start working. Next slide, please. So that is what the developer chose, wanted to go through an administrative process, which is much, much shorter than going through a whole public hearing process for rezoning, right? So they did choose that. So during the site plan process, they were also concurrently processing an alternative equivalent compliance measure. This is something that City of Arlington introduced with our Unified Development Code. And this is something that many of our developers are really, really appreciative of, is providing them some way of doing a little bit different design-wise, not meeting the literal standard of our design code, but meeting the intent of it in a different way. So giving them a little bit more flexibility is what we were trying to do without having to go through Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council to get those deviations taken care of. So it has to be, in lieu of this, I am providing this by meeting the intent of the standard. That's what they had to show us. So so Paris did have a few items in the design standards that he wanted to get an AEC, and that was done during the site plan process. And this slide just gives you what are the types of things that we would look for, types of items that we would even think about an AEC. Next slide, please. So this is how the building was built, and in 2018. If you look at the bottom floor of that building, at that time it was not fully occupied. I think it was just started. The occupancy had just started. So bottom floor is all dark. The finish outs of those retail spaces was not done. It was just a shell space. Next slide, please. And then 2018, after that building was complete, and Park Place, that other development student housing project that I talked about, Park Place came in for their site plan and building permit. And there were items that our council had not contemplated at that time that, oh, this could be student housing. Oh, it could be 5-bedroom units. And it could be rented out per bedroom basis. And we are going to allow up to 100 units per acre. So 100 units times 5, you could have this many beds. All this was not contemplated when we had the ordinance created for the downtown business zoning district. So after Park Place came, and they came for 80 units per acre and did have some 5-bedroom units, the bedroom count was, I think, 700 bedroom beds that was counted. So with all that, council started feeling that, hey, are we meeting the saturation point in downtown with student housing? Because there were other student housing projects also built in the downtown area, not so much to the core, but a little bit on the edges of it. So we were reaching at that point where we felt like maybe we are hitting the saturation point for student housing. So with that in mind, the council made a change to the ordinance where now it could not be approved administratively. If you even had a mixed-use development, you would still need a development plan approval process that goes through Planning and Zoning Commission and City Council. So Park Place got in just before they made this amendment. And I think it may be because of Park Place that this amendment happened at that time. But this is still now existing in our ordinance that even if you do a mixed-use development, you will require to go through a development plan process. Next slide, please. So as I said, the 101 Center had to create 15% non-residential use. So 10% of it that they use, that's the red portion that you see on the bottom left corner. That red portion is the retail space. So they were able to make the 10% with that red and the pink space. That's their fitness center. So we calculated all that, kind of made it, that's the non-residential piece, but it counted only to 10%. So the rest of the gray portions that you see on Center and Mesquite, those were live work units. And the photos that you see, that's how it's built. So each unit is built such that it has a small gate opening into the streetscape of Center and Mesquite, and it has a space up there. It kind of looks like a gate or an entryway and a space up there to have a sign of a business to go on. So it's a small little front yard or lobby type area where somebody could get in. There's a door there. The number of the unit is right there on that. So it's built to such a way that if a business wanted to go in, they could easily fit in. And then the floor plan of that unit is such that the first piece is more that like the living area or the office area. And then the bedrooms come at the back side. So it's built to that standard. Even building code wise, it's built to that standard. So our 15% non-residential use, when we say we did allow live work unit to be one of those non-residential use, but the caveat with that was that they have to have a certificate of occupancy for the business. So if you were just working from home, that's not called live work unit, right? So you had to have a real business. And that's the challenge that Paris had at that time, that he was not getting any tenants to move into these units that had a business that could qualify to ask for a certificate of occupancy. So he came to City Council and, said that he cannot make this work. These units are just going to be dark. That's definitely not what the city wanted. We don't want such ground floor units to be dark. We wanted a vibrant streetscape. So his ask was, okay, I'm zoned downtown business. I'm asking you for a planned development. Now I'm going to go through the rezoning. But the building is already built and everything is done. So now it's just a question of council. Will you agree to that? Less than 15%, because he had 10%. What the council agreed to, let's go to the next slide. Again, this kind of gives you the background, which I've already mentioned. So let's keep going. Next slide. And I think we can go to the next slide too. And one more. So this is how go back one slide. This is how the building looks now. All of those tenant spaces have now been filled in. All the retail is filled in. Yes, and it looks amazing. And it's the right kind of businesses. I love going to any of these restaurants, just walk across from City Hall and go there. So we love that. So it has really worked out well. But what the council agreed to when Paris asked for that was, hey, we're not going to completely let you off of the live work units. We still need it, but we understand there's not much market demand at this time, but maybe we'll give you a little bit time to get there because things are changing in downtown, and maybe there will be a time when we can have that demand for live work unit. You know, Paris has also been involved with the Bishop Street design in Dallas and all that. And he did claim at that time when he brought this project that that's how Bishop Street also happened. And so he was given, so 2018, he asked for that. He was given 5 years time. I'm trying to see if there's a slide that I put in there with the 5-year period. Can you go to the next slide? Let's see if I capture that. Maybe not. Okay, so go back. I'll tell you what happened. So 5 years time. So he gets 5 years time, 2018 to 2023. So his clock is actually expiring now in October. October is when he has to show that at least 10% of his live work units are now leased to live work, actual live work units, live work businesses. So, so we have now sent him that reminder, hey, October's coming up. So we'll see what happens then. But that is what, and then the next following year, so he gets another full 5 years. So from 2023 to 2027, finally, all the live work units should actually become like live work units. That is the plan. I don't know where we will be at that time. I have not seen any of the live work units yet occupied by an actual live work unit because I should see a CO come to us for those units. So that's where we are. The same thing followed to Park Place. So if you go to the next slide. Yeah, so Park Place, if you look at that one, that is an 80 units per acre, and they didn't want to go through a PD rezoning at that time. So they moved to this administrative process, showed that they will have non-residential, and their 15% non-residential also includes not just retail along Abram, but they have live work units all along Mesquite and Elm and Border Street. So quite a few live work units that needs to be filled in over there too, and they got the same 5 years time to do that as well. So then, but along with all this, I wanted to show you, you know, what 101 Center did for us was a lot more revitalization in the downtown area. So Park Place came, it's a new housing, right? College Park was our university themselves creating the College Park there, where they have retail also, and they have their conference centers, everything coming from Center Street. So it was a great addition to our downtown. And then just north of the railroad is the Urban Union place that another visionary, Ryan Dotson, the Dotson Development Company, they planned it and city helped them out. So it was a great partnership, and that's a destination place now. Lots of good restaurants and very, very popular ones coming over there. So that's what we have going on in the downtown. Next slide, please. One thing that I did not mention, I previously said in one of the slides that we needed a grocery store. We were finally able to get Ann's Grocer in the 101 Center, one of the spaces there. So that we did have to put in some money to make that happen, such that that business could make it work here. But there are some conditions associated with it. And but it's come, and now we do have a grocery store in downtown Arlington. Again, as I said, it spurred a lot of urban development in downtown. Some of the images that you see are from the Urban Union, and then on Abram Street with the Park Place. Next slide. I think that's about it. Yeah, all right. So if y'all have any questions for me, I think somebody did send some question. I didn't read it. Is there any other city that has developed this type of development? I'm sure they have. I don't know. I can't think of something specific right now, but I'm sure the audience here can tell you where else it has been developed.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I was gonna say our next speaker, Carrollton, I know in their downtown has some very similar design, vertical mixed use. Shawn, did you get the other two questions?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
a
let's
couple of
do it.
questions we could hit really quick here, just in the time, but there was a question, there was incentive for mixed use. Was affordable housing considered? Is that something you looked at?
No, at that time, the developer came with like market rate housing. That's what they were proposing. No talk about affordable housing at that time in 2015. Times will be different at this time when if people come, there is a lot of talk about affordable housing. And I think there's another question. I
We have-
noticed. I can read it out, Shauna, if you want, or
Oh, go ahead.
I noticed a pedestrian sky bridge at the student housing. Was there any pushback against this to enhance pedestrian help? Not a whole lot of pushback on the sky bridge because they were on two different blocks. And so they do have access on the crosswalk on the surface on the roadway side too, but at a certain, since they were like 5-story, they wanted to have another sky bridge, and that was okay. We did have a little bit pushback on the design of it at that time, but that was okayed. Was there any pushback from City Council regarding incentives for the grocery store? Really not. We wanted that. Council wanted a grocery store because they had heard so much from the residents of the downtown area as well as the East Arlington area that they did not have a grocery store. And so it was one of the areas, the food desert areas. And so we did want a grocery store. So it worked out well. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's a really interesting story of working with your development partner to get the type of development in place that you're looking for. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Ravi Shah. He is City of Development, Carrollton Development Services. Going to be talking about Trinity Mill Station area.
Well, thank you. My name is Ravi Shah, as you said. I want to first thank the previous speaker. I think that was an eloquent presentation about Arlington. I actually spent most of my time, my childhood time over there at the University of Texas at Arlington. So I'm very familiar with that area and I appreciate the presentation. I also want to thank the two fellows that wrote me into making this presentation for you all. So I want to thank them publicly, Lauren Shapiro and Josh Giles. I appreciate you both for roping me into this presentation. What I'm going to present to you is a little bit unique, and so you all need to bear with me a little bit. Many of the functions that you've talked about, that was talked about by the previous speaker, that Gincy spoke about, all of the vision to reality, all the functions related to planning, development, building inspections, from incentives to the maintenance bond, the 2-year maintenance bond. All of those functions reside under one department, under one chain of command. So I'm going to take a little pause there and kind of let you think that through. For those of you that have to deal with an economic development department that does the incentives, to a building inspection department that does the permit approval, you've got a public works that goes out and does the approval for the maintenance bond. All of those functions are within one department under one chain of command, which makes life so much easier. So your typical things that you hear about, density and trying to adopt to the code that you've got versus trying to give waivers and variances and stuff like that, is a little bit foreign to the city of Carrollton when it comes to mixed use multifamily and mixed-use development. So with that, I've got a little bit of verbiage. If I can go to the next slide, please, and if you can just kind of roll through. Carrollton is located right dead center. We are supposedly to be the next Mockingbird. We've got the silver line, the green line that kind of intersects in there. We're about 20 minutes from the airport. We've got 3 rail stations. We've got the downtown Carrollton station, the Trinity Mill station, and then the Frankfurt station. The downtown station is a whole new topic that we can talk about all day, every day. But I think for today's purpose, I think we picked Trinity Mill Station because, as you may have read in the newspaper, it has just come out of the ground, and it's been in the making for the last 20 plus years. Next slide, please. As you will see, we have with this parcel here, this is a redevelopment project. It's not a greenfield. It's not something that was already existing out there. Very distinct, creative urban center to attract corporate offices and retail and restaurants. This was the council's major vision. Council was also very strategic in how we acquired land parcels and existing buildings on this site. We also partnered with DART. This is probably the only piece of land in the North Dallas area that is the largest TOD area, number 1, and 2, with a public-private partnership, because we're involved with DART on this part as well. This is, like I said, 26 acres. We have also recently purchased generational development property. Call it your Legacy West, Legacy East type property. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But we purchased about 110 acres, which is formerly known as the NTTA site off of George Bush Turnpike, in the hopes that this, even before my time, that development will come to some fruition. The beauty about this property and something that planners always want is having a city council and a mayor stand steady fast on their vision. That is very difficult to find these days. Councils come, councils goes, mayors comes, mayor goes, and the vision changes with that. In Carrollton, this vision stood steady fast for 25 years. And I've been with the city for a very long time, so I've kind of seen that through this. This is where actually a crossroad of where vision meets reality. Next page. So this is the area. On the left-hand side of your screen, that is the DART station. That is the Trinity Mill station. This is where the DCTA line comes to, and this is where the green line starts at. The portion that is in the middle is owned by the city. There used to be a former Home Depot there and several other out parcels that the city has been patiently waiting and buying those properties. And then, of course, the properties along the George Bush Turnpike up there. And then, of course, the bus station that used to be the former DART bus station. That's that acreage that you see in the blue on the right-hand side. Next slide, please. This 26 acres. Now, again, for those of you that are planners here, I think you'll appreciate this. When we started with this project, we hired a master developer. We put an RFP out there and we selected Integral as our master developer from Atlanta. Together with them, we started developing a master plan. That master plan then included several things like design features, water features, the infrastructure plans. You can see how quickly some of these things were done. That's because we were very nimble in the city. Like I said earlier, because of our one-stop shop process, we have the entire gamut from start to finish in one department that makes life so much easier. So you can see on April 6th of last year of 2021, a site development plan was submitted to the city. Now, the way that our zoning ordinance is written is that if you've got a site development plan that has already been through city council for a development agreement or an incentive or something like that, then that plan does not need to go through the Planning and Zoning Commission. That shaves off 90 days right there, shaves off additional scrutiny, because council has already seen what they want, and that's why they've incentivized the project. That's the way that they've done it. So that allows us to sort of bifurcate that process out. And then you'll see on the next slide, please. And I promise you there's some cool pictures in here too. We went through the bid review. Again, that bid review was done through Development Services. We did the legal review for the infrastructure. We started our construction on the Esplanade. Well, what is the Esplanade? The Esplanade is a 3.5 acre park that straddles the development. It is basically the size of Clyde Warren Park. As I mentioned earlier, because the SDP was approved, it was, I would say, probably a slam dunk deal because council had already seen the program plan, they'd already seen the elevations and so forth of the development. They were intimately involved. One little caveat to that is that we also have a TOD committee that's made up of the mayor and 3 council members. So that's 4 votes already going into the meeting that have already seen the project. So that kind of also helps from a planning purposes. Of course, the building permit was issued in January. I think that took us less than what, guys, 2.5 months to issue because we'd already been seeing the plans. And then, of course, the construction of the Esplanade started last year and about last year. And we are now ending the completion of that Esplanade. And just about a week ago, the construction of the mixed-use multifamily started. Next slide, please. So real quickly, I kind of mentioned, I just want to give you a little snapshot of what my department does altogether. It's not just the planning portion. We also do the due diligence for equity partners. We look at creating development agreements and purchase and sales agreements. We draft those, we get them to legal. We also assist with any of the due diligence that the private sector is doing. We assist with that. And then, of course, we look at the capital term sheets and negotiate that. Now, again, it really helps because you know what the project looks like. And my previous background was in design, so it kind of helps to see that, all right, they're asking for an incentive of $7 million. And are there any possibilities of doing some value engineering? Are there any possibilities of reducing that incentive ask by asking them to do certain other things? So those are the kind of things that sort of helps us also within our department to kind of look at all the talent pool that we have. Next slide, please. Since then, in February, as you can see the timeline, this was this year, we finalized the development agreement. That was actually drafted in development services, sent to legal for their approval. We also sent that same approval to DART to get them on board because we have a master development agreement with that. And then, of course, we started construction on March 1st with some basic silt fencing because the development agreement was written in such a way that it said that development had to start on March 1st. So, well, what does commencement of construction mean? Well, instead of getting lawyers involved in that, we can define that through the building code that once you start a construction means the start of a building permit, the start of doing anything that you do with the site work. So next slide, please. So this is the program plan. I know you guys have been waiting for some good pictures. So the middle portion that you see there, that is the 3.5 acre Esplanade. It is a green lawn area with a $1 million fountain. You have to see this fountain. It is just drop dead gorgeous. The bottom piece on your slide is the mixed use multifamily. It's got about 436 units with about 600 plus parking spaces. It's a 7-story structure, which will house probably some public parking as well for the retail. There's about 10,000 square feet of retail with about 5,000 square feet of a restaurant space that will be facing on the left-hand side of your slide. You'll see that little corner there. I can't point to it, but on the mixed-use multifamily, that'll be the restaurant with a huge patio like in the front. The office construction that we were talking about is directly to the top of your slide. I can't kind of point to it. I apologize, but it's the one that is right north of the little retail pavilion that you see. That office building is 6 stories with about 137,000 square feet of space with about 10,000 square feet of retail and restaurant space. Next slide, please. This is the Esplanade, just a little bit of details of that. We wanted to create something special. We wanted to make sure. Now, again, as I said, we've kind of pushed the envelope. We kind of forced the market. We've forced the marketplace because we've really gone out there and created a true placemaking. I mean, as I said earlier, this was a former Home Depot and taking a parking lot and converting it into a gorgeous park with possibilities of having festivals and stuff like that is really a tale to tell. Next slide, please. This is a 3D, the shorter blue building that you see there. That is the office that is under construction, as well as the mixed-use multifamily that's in the orange. The roadway you see on the top of your slide is George Bush Turnpike. The gray road that you see winding down there is Dickerson Overpass, and then at the bottom of your screen is a rail line, the green line, and then below that would be the IH-35 corridor. Next slide, please. This is the fountain that I talked about. Again, truly a great place to hang out. And I mean, what a beautiful master plan. Kind of helps the multifamily have visibility in a very raw, dense area, straddled with two highway systems. You've got Dickerson Overpass. So, I mean, this is actually in a pit. If you can visualize 635 at 75, this is exactly that type of location there. And to create something here was very meaningful to have the multifamily face the park and then have the office also face the park on the opposite side. Next slide, please. This is the fountain that I talked about. I won't get into the details of this because I'd like you to come out there one day when it's open and look up the QR code. But this is based on Trinity Mills station design. This is the semaphores. There are 12 semaphores there. Each of them are timed. They're hour on the hour. You could actually sit there and without looking at your phone or your watch, you could tell what time it is. It's also daytime ready and again nighttime ready. It's got light, it's got steam, it's got water, it's got all the mimicry of a railroad setting. Next slide, please. This is the 6-story office building. This will have, as I said earlier, the 10,000 square feet of retail restaurant facing the front. On the top floor of the 6-story there, we're looking at trying to bring in a restaurant. Hopefully, we can manage that. But as you see, the way that the building faces, it faces the Esplanade, which adds additional beauty. It's not just a building facing a highway system. I think with the post-COVID environment, people are looking for things like this. I think the flight to quality is going to be very important moving forward with design. Next slide. And then, of course, this is the backside of the building. We were very meticulous. We wanted to make sure that even the backside of a building, unlike some of the mixed-use projects that you've seen around the Metroplex, most developers will shy away from doing anything grand on the backside of buildings. They'll leave it in its raw state. We wanted to make sure that when you approach this building from any direction, that it had the aesthetics to portray a true mixed-use development. So, next slide. This is the mixed-use multifamily that I spoke of. It is 5 stories with a 7-story parking garage. It will have retail on the bottom. There are 2 streets, one-way streets that sort of couplets that go around the park area. So basically, the designer designed it in such a way that you didn't have to wait on traffic to crisscross. If you've been to Waters Creek or Legacy West, you could actually get run over because even though it's a 2-way street, you get run over by cars or the cars have to slow down. Here, it's timed in such a way that you could actually walk from the office to the mixed-use multifamily within a very short distance. I think it takes about a minute and a half to walk across the park. Next slide. This is the part that will be facing the station area. That's the restaurant piece that I talked about with a plaza area there for additional congregation and hopefully other types of kiosks during festivals and stuff like that. Next slide. And if I can ask you to press the video on that, I'd really appreciate that, Sydnee. You can turn the volume up. I can't hear it, but I hope you guys can hear it. Sydnee, you're on mute. That's why I don't think anybody can hear the music.
I'll try this again. Is it working?
We're good. We're good. Just keep going. You're fine.
Okay.
Again, this was the raw piece of land that after buying all the buildings and tearing them down, the city kind of took a very bullish stand. And like I said, we stood steady fast. We're very appreciative of DART for entering into an agreement with us. This is the 3D drawing. That's the multifamily on the bottom of your screen. Of course, the office, the 6-story office that we talked about. There were a lot of, and I know this has been a question that's been asked of me a lot, is how did we go about fashioning our incentives? So if I've got about a couple more minutes, I'll kind of talk a little bit about how we went about doing our incentive agreement. Again, we don't believe in creating ordinances that are sort of a bait and switch. Our ordinances are very straightforward. And if you come forward with, again, our SDP is very focused on just maybe looking at what is it that the marketplace can hold and what the marketplace wants. We don't have any specifics about 60 units per acre or 25 units per acre. I think everything is just based on what is it that the market can handle. If the market can handle 200 units per acre, well, let's take a look at that. And so as you're watching that video, I'll talk a little bit about how we went about fashioning our development agreement with Integral and COA. One of the best things that we did was we went through the due diligence period and then kind of figured what they were proposing. City council came in and wanted more than what was programmed for this site. The original building was programmed at about 4 stories. It was an MOB. The mixed use multifamily was much smaller because it is a catalyst site. And so they did not want to go out there and be bullish, but I think council wanted to be bullish. So they came back in and increased the height of the building. They asked to add some additional aesthetics to the buildings as well. And so with that, obviously the developer is going to come back in and ask for incentives. Any part of our transit center district, we've already got it in the MDA that all, and when I say MDA, I apologize, it's the master development agreement. It's already written in there that all building permits, all zoning, all of those fees are waived. So there is no such thing as a fake incentive. We're not going to go out there and say, oh yeah, the building permit was $300,000, so now we're going to give you a $300,000 incentive. It's just right off the bat. I mean, that is just given to you as you come into the city of Carrollton. Likewise with our standards, there is no standards established such that you have to come back in and be forced to ask for a variance. And once you get the variance, we call that as an incentive. An incentive is a pure incentive. And so what we did was, as we hit the post-COVID environment, this project got delayed by almost 2 years because of COVID. And because of the supply chain, the cost of construction skyrocketed. And during that process, we meaning the equity partners, the developer, their engineers, and the city, all of us got around the table and started doing value engineering. As I mentioned earlier, in my department, we have engineers that can also do some of this value engineering. So we went back in there, and while the building code may require a 3-hour wall in a certain location, we went back and said, that's an overkill. The architect has overkilled the requirements. Let's go see if we can reduce those requirements down. We were able to shave off, I would say, almost $3 million right off the bat with one sitting, not compromising the form, not compromising the architecture, not compromising anything. And so that helped the developer go back to their lenders. And then over the last 6 months, there was still a small financial gap that they had to fill. And so they came back to the city, and the city made entered into a firm negotiation of dealing with the parking garages, because we know that 3.5 acre park is going to need parking. I mean, makes sense, right? So the city's not going to go out there and build a parking garage. And so we said, why don't we incentivize the parking garages, which is a standard piece that's going to be there forever. And then that could also be used by the citizens of Carrollton during off days. So it kind of ended up, and then there were other caveats that we added in there as part of the deal terms and part of our negotiation. But we feel very confident that this project will come out of the ground. And then if you go to the next slide, please. I want to just kind of end with telling you what this is going to do. we don't just look at what a project is bringing in. We look at what the project has a return on investment. I am a businessman. If I didn't mention that earlier, I look at what is the public investment going to make and what is it that we're going to get in return, not just from valuation purposes, but from tax purposes as well. So a $16.2 million of public investment in both the office and the multifamily will probably leverage, we think, about $161 million of project valuation. It should at some point unlock $700 million of total development in that 25 acres, which includes the DART property. And then we think that it'll generate a total increment property tax revenue of approximately $3.5 million per year. We feel that the city will receive incremental property tax revenue of approximately $800,000 plus per year. And then the growth in our TERS is going to increase by almost $830,000 with this phase one catalyst only. So think about what the potential could be. And this is something that we use for those of you that are making presentations to council for incentives and so forth. I say, look me up. I think I've got some information to share. I think this is some of the things that I share to our city council, which makes it a little bit more digestible when you're doling out $7 million of public investment to a private developer for a parking garage. You know, it makes sense to kind of talk about deal terms and then talk about return on investment. I'll stop here. I appreciate you guys having me over here to speak about our project. Thank you. Any questions for me?
Yeah, I think, Ravi, I think in the interest of time, we'll move on now. But if you're going to stick around, hopefully we'll have a few more minutes at the end for some questions.
Sure.
But interesting story, especially seeing, it's great to see that such a strong vision starting to really come to implementation, and the return on the investment is fabulous. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is, excuse me, Eric Hill with the City of Plano. He's the Assistant Director of Planning, and he's going to talk about Plano mixed-use projects. Take it away, Eric.
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Appreciated the previous presentations. This one's very different from the last two, so hopefully this will be helpful as well. If you'll go to the next slide. Really what I'm going to do is present kind of the history of mixed-use developments in Plano. So I've been with Plano about 20 years now and probably have worked on 25 to 30 mixed-use developments. You know, Plano is very large, tons of development activity, and we have an interesting legacy as far as mixed use goes. So I'm going to share really how we have created a lot of districts over the years and some lessons learned at the end, and then just give you kind of a information on what's coming. I'm going to go quickly through a lot of different developments and of course happy to answer questions about those. So really mixed use developments in Plano started in the Legacy area, and then it moved to our downtown. For a while we had really a lot of planned development districts, and that was really challenging for staff and the community. And then at some point the city started to standardize regulations, and then currently we're really in a phase of redevelopment and a lot of opportunities. Can you guys hear me okay? All right, next slide, please. Go ahead. So the Shops Legacy, this is a planned development district you all may be familiar with. It was established in 1998, really coming off of the EDS headquarters. You know, the goal was really to attract workers and residents, folks from Plano, around the Legacy Business Park. This is a Diwani plan, and there are elements of a form-based code in this planned development district. It was centered around a main street with commercial and residential. And what I did is, you'll see in these slides, I've highlighted items in green and red. And I just wanted to mention those. Really, the green, I think, are, you know, some good positives about it. And the red are just some challenges or opportunities. So I'll kind of touch on those. Regarding Legacy, you all may be familiar with this development, but open space is an interesting challenge in this development. So the image in front of you is the pond, which is on the south side. That was the original section of the development. It's a beautiful pond, has a nice walking space around it, but you can't really utilize that space. So there's not really an opportunity for usable, passive open space. The south side has this pond, and the north side has a fantastic cemetery that's used as open space. Other than that, there's some residential, courtyards and things like that. But open space is really just a missed opportunity in Legacy. And then there are some vertical mixed use opportunities. There's some existing, multi-story buildings, but those second floors especially have always been difficult to activate. So vertical mixed use has not really been successful here. There's also another PD that was started and it's done fairly well in this area, but really this is almost like the second mixed use development in the city. So next slide, please. And then we moved to downtown. So City Hall has been in downtown for many, many years. When DART was expanding the Red Line, the city established a new zoning district. We wanted to reinvigorate the downtown, of course, focused around City Hall and the DART opportunities that were coming. And so what we did is created a downtown business government district, similar to what you heard earlier. It allows residential uses. We have a variety of commercial uses, including bars that are allowed by right. There's some interesting parking opportunities. You can use public parking to be credited towards private developments with P&Z approval. Some challenges that we were working through were how to blend the standards of new urban development with the old historic core. If you've been to downtown Plano, the core along 15th Street is extremely successful. The historic aesthetics have remained in place, and the city is very much supportive of those. There's also just been some challenges in making sure that as new development occurs with the density, how does it blend into the old neighborhoods that are surrounding? So we've got some setbacks and some other kind of protections in place just to make sure development is really respectful of those neighborhoods. So this also has some form-based elements in it. We've also had challenges with first floor uses. So again, coming back to this vertical mixed use challenge, there's multiple phases of development with multifamily and first floor opportunities. We've allowed those to flex into either business or solely residential because business, kind of flex business and residential has been really challenging to sustain over time. And, obviously there's no issue renting the residential, those as residential spaces, but commercial opportunities have been difficult to ensure success. So next slide. So after really Legacy and downtown kicked off, we went into an era of PDs and lots of PDs. I've probably written 20 PDs at this point for mixed use in Plano. This is one of the first ones. This is at George Bush, which is on the south side. Renner and Shiloh are kind of at the southeast corner of that intersection. This is a development that was really vacant land. There were some interesting context-sensitive uses out there. There's a old warehouse and some industrial properties. So we wanted to establish something that allowed for residential, allowed for open space, and really started an urban framework here. And because this is one of our initial PDs, we made some, I don't want to say mistakes, but there's been some challenges. We established some very specific standards through tracts, and those have been really challenging to ensure that they've maintained viability. The development has evolved, and you'll see a lot of these challenges throughout some of these developments. As projects evolve over time, it's really hard to maintain developer buy-in. It ends up being our staff kind of holding the line on the vision for the development, and that's resulted in some really watered down standards and just development that, again, doesn't stick to the original vision that was promised to P&Z and council. So this has some success to it, and it's about 60% developed now. This is a little bit outdated aerial, but there's definitely some opportunities that were missed here. Next slide, please. Another PD, this is more recent. This is called Mustang Square. This is at State Highway 121, just east of the Dallas North Tollway. This is a very interesting project. This was a mixed-use proposal. You can see there's 2 large multifamily buildings there, some townhomes and commercial space, open space. There was a huge amount of public input. There's a residential neighborhood you can see immediately to the south and a Home Depot to the west. The residential neighborhood, this one and the surrounding, the adjacent one to the east, the city received over 1,000 responses from the public about this request. And most of them, as you can guess, were no way, no how is multifamily allowed here. So if you go to the next slide, the applicant revised their plan and they changed it to a single family request. So this is what's been approved. You can see single family is now in the background. 121's on the right-hand side. Again, there's some elements of form-based code here. There's a main street with commercial. There's some open space kind of scattered throughout. The challenges with this property, it's actually undeveloped right now. This has been about 10 years since it's been approved. And due to market cycles, other conditions we may not be aware of, the developer's just yet to break ground. They've put some of the infrastructure in place, but they're having challenges with some phasing conditions we put in. And really, it's just the market's evolved. It's been really challenging for them to get going. So we're waiting to see what happens here. We do have some momentum lately, so stay tuned on this one. Hopefully see some good development coming soon. So next slide, please. Legacy West. Sounds like many of you are familiar with Legacy West. Again, on the west side of the tollway. This was another PD. This is probably the most, I would say, probably the fastest planned development district that was established and constructed. We zoned, and I think they built everything within, I want to say, 18 months out there. So that included, this core that you see before you, multiple mixed-use, multifamily buildings, hotel. I think several of the commercial operators were finished or under construction. So it was such a fast project. We're all a lot older because of this project, but we learned a lot. Challenges in Legacy West, if you've never been out there, I think the main street is really, kind of traditional and works really well. However, there's not really great open space. There is a fountain, and it's a beautiful fountain, but there's not really any congregating green space. So in my opinion, this is just me, it's a little sterile. And we've been working with the developers over time to see how they could change that streetscape, maybe pull out some of the vehicular activity and put in some more green space. Another challenge is really that it has cannibalized a lot of the development from Shops at Legacy. So the original Shops at Legacy development has struggled because everything is moved over to the side of the tollway. So we'll see what happens here, but continuing to work on this one for the future. Next slide. So you saw kind of 3 distinct PDs. As I mentioned, I worked on multiple of those. For a while, we were really struggling with negotiating and writing standards and kind of repeating ourselves and arguing a lot with developers. It was just getting really challenging. So what the city did is established a mixed-use zoning district. It's called urban mixed use. It's for large parcels, 50 acres plus. And what it does is it establishes a required mix of uses, establishes a main street, open space, allowances for residential and commercial. However, it's very complicated. It's, I think, about 10 pages of just straight regulations. There's opportunities for adjustments through the zoning process. There's phasing requirements. And this is an example of our most recent mixed use. It's the redevelopment of Collin Creek Mall. If you go to the next slide, Collin Creek's about 100 acres. It's from the 80s. It was this is probably the most complex project I've ever worked on. It does have a PID. You have just the design itself. They have a subterranean garage. You have city parkland and rights of way over the streets. They have kind of a multi-tiered phasing situation. They have, it's so complex. It just blows my mind as we talk about it. But you can see the development by the numbers. It's a ton of retail space. They've got 2,300 multifamily units that are allowed. They are starting to construct the single family And we've worked hard with them to just make sure that they are following this, what they've promised to the city. So this was approved based upon, a lot of folks have a lot of fond memories of the mall. And we had people come to the hearing and say, oh, took my daughter to get her ears pierced at Claire's out here. My son used to play soccer, on the fields, etc. So we wanted the applicant to really commit to a vision, and through these mixed use districts, they're really helping us to fulfill that. But there's just a ton of complexity, especially with the engineering concerns and financial situation of this development. So next slide, please. So going from there, we found some success in urban mixed use developments. We actually have 3 of those large scale mixed use developments. We decided that we really needed a neighborhood scaled version. We continued to get requests for redevelopment and kind of what's the city's vision for retail corners. Plano is extremely over retailed. Almost every 4 corner is zoned for retail uses. We have frequent cannibalization of businesses. So what we did is we took about a year and a half, 2 years, we established 2 districts, a neighborhood business design district. That's a mixed use commercial and residential district, similar to urban mixed use, but obviously on a neighborhood scale. So it has height sensitive setbacks and, requests connections to the neighborhoods. Coupled with that, there's a residential community design district. This is a middle housing district. It has tiers of housing that are allowed, and you can really combine these districts together and create something that I think is what folks are looking for and needing to get value, economic and otherwise real value out of those retail corners. These are really good standards. We find them. I think they've been well thought through, but they're also very complex. So we have one of these districts right now, the Plano's, the event center that we have is actually, we proactively rezone that to mixed use. We have a hotel development that we're working on. And we also have a small area plan on the east side of town called the Vision Oak Point. And that is intended to also help us establish, I think, a residential community design district on what's the 2nd largest remaining property in Plano. So we're going to work on that sometime soon. Next slide. Coupled with that, we are working on a community design plan. So we wanted just some general criteria. This is supported by our comprehensive plan. And we continue to just negotiate with developers about what is good design and, what does redevelopment look like, and really the new phase of, suburban/urban development in Plano. And so we're currently working on this plan, and hopefully this will be coupled with those districts or with any PDs we create in the future to just help us move more efficiently through the zoning process. So next slide. Now we're really in an era of redevelopments, and I just wanted to share a couple of those with you. One is an old Garden Ridge property. It's this beautiful antique mall. I'm sure no one else has this type of blighted property in their city. But this was bought by really a family about 10, 15 years ago, and they held on to it, just waiting for the right developer. So if you go to the next slide, a developer purchased the property, and they are redeveloping it into what you see before you. It's a planned development district. It's a mix of multifamily and office. They're reusing half of the old Garden Ridge Antique Mall building. It actually is almost finished with construction, and this is a graphic from council, but it looks almost exactly like this right now. We worked with them to really blend the development with the neighborhood. There's an existing residential neighborhood to the east. Want to make sure they were respectful of those residents, and worked hard on open space for the property. Just some challenges that we're working through here. They've proposed some retail buildings. Again, Plano is so over retailed. We keep telling folks, hey, you don't need to do any retail. We're not asking to do any more, but they wanted to. Everybody wants their restaurant pads. We understand that. So if you go to the next slide, I think it shows the plan at the left side. You can see they have office in white on the left-hand side of the plan. Multifamily is in orange on the right, some central open space. and then some retail pads, which really don't have any frontage or visibility. So I think those are going to be really challenging. There's also a major encore easement on this property, which is why you see all that surface parking to the north of the buildings. But this is a really interesting project. I think the citizens were really concerned about this because it was a longstanding property in the city, but the developer has really held true to their word, and it's turning out really nice. Next slide, please. Last redevelopment I just wanted to mention is the First Baptist Church in Plano. This was a property that's on the edge of downtown. And so we're getting into a lot of questions, and I know you folks are too, about really what are the edges of our downtown? How far do we expand the zoning and things like that? So we worked with this property owner. The church moved to another location in the city, and this property owner requested a mix of townhomes, which are on the right and top side of the image here. They offered to, and we work with them to preserve the chapel, which is at the top left, provide some open space. And, the challenges that we really had here are, again, being respectful of the neighbors. There's a historic neighborhood that surrounds this property. And it's just, we wanted to make sure that they had setbacks that were appropriate. I don't think that we quite got there with this one. I think we would prefer some different reduced heights on the property, but it is what it is. And also some questions that we had on commercial viability. You can see that central building in blue that again doesn't have great frontage or visibility, so we're concerned about its long-term viability. But this is under construction as well, so we will see. Next slide. And I'm coming towards the end. I wanted to share with you kind of a summary of what I've learned over my years. We get into a lot of questions about flexibility versus predictability. The developers really want flexibility in the city's regulations. Hey, don't tie us down too much. Give us opportunities. We've got to see what the market brings. We know we want housing, but the commercial is a question. But the citizens and your council members, they want predictability. So we've really tried to walk that line and create just meaningful standards that allow your mix of uses to evolve, and hopefully without rezoning unless you have to. That's what I mean with evolve without pain. Can you add some fluctuation in those uses, especially in commercial uses, which I feel like for us, housing is really the triggering land use. Commercial use is not so much. So how can we make sure that the uses are flexible enough to change with the market and get zoning where we need to? Open space is really critical for us. Our citizens are really interested in open space design and form, just good form. We have a lot of difficulty convincing people, from a planning perspective, from a typical design, good design perspective, what you're doing is not good. We've tried a lot of different strategies and have had some success convincing people to redesign to just provide better form, but not always successful. Phasing, I liked how the previous speaker mentioned bait and switch. We've noticed, we'll get some requests for housing, and then the housing will be built and the commercial will be promised but never built. So now we're putting in more strict phasing standards because our community really wants the developer to commit to a commercial component with their housing that they're granted. And then just real quickly, just making sure that we have kind of common and standards that are easy to be administrated. We have so many PDs, I think 20, 30, 40 mixed use PDs, too many at this point, and they're really hard for our planners to administrate on a case-by-case basis. So can we have common standards that are fairly easy? Fighting the good fight, I put this in here because, a lot of things that planners, I think, plant their flag on, the community stops caring about, or once after the hearing, nobody cares. And so we end up having a lot of fights on, again, form and other things that don't really matter to a lot of people. So we started asking our council members and planning zone commissioners, what are you really interested in? What do you want us to hold the line on? And what fights can we let go just to help things move along and give us all some sanity back? And then just make sure we take time to get things right. So I've tried to really hold a hard line on if projects are not ready to go, that we won't notice them for hearings, because what happens is we end up getting 50-60% drawings and standards, and then our staff is just scrambling and driving everybody crazy to get things perfect before the meeting. And so I've tried to be harder about this with the developers and kind of make them experience our pain, and hold them off on noticing until they get their stuff right. So I think I've got one more slide if you go to the next slide. Just some things coming soon to be aware of in Plano. We've got our largest property, undeveloped property, that has a mixed use proposal. It's been approved. It's called Haggard Farm. It's this agricultural based mixed use. They have a unique assembly and retail area. We'll see if it gets built. So that's been approved. It's next to the tollway south of Legacy. Our EDS headquarters, this was just approved on Monday by P&Z for a life sciences redevelopment. So they wanted some mixed use out there, but just to accompany the medical side of things. This is a huge opportunity for Plano. You may have seen an article on it. I think it'll likely have success at council. We're continuing to expand downtown. We've got opportunities for pickleball. That seems like the commercial soup du jour lately. So we'll see if we actually get some pickleball stuff coming in. We've got a lot of adaptive reuse of buildings. I probably have a request for a redevelopment reuse and looking at mixed use probably once every 2 weeks. So Plano has a lot of opportunities for redevelopment. Levon Farms, I mentioned this earlier, that's our second largest remaining property. We're working on a master planned kind of middle housing development out there. And then the Dart Silver Line, we're doing market study out there to see the best land uses that would surround those stations. And then we'll work on zoning based upon the results of that study. So that is all that I have. Appreciate the opportunity to present to you all, and would be glad to answer any questions.
Going on in Plano and mixed use. That's great to see. And some really great lessons learned. Really appreciate you sharing all that. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
We will continue on. I am going to talk a little bit about NCTCOG's efforts in the area of mixed use, kind of tying everything together at the regional scale. Sydnee, if you want to go ahead to that presentation.
Yes, just give me 1 second so I can switch our slides around. I'm going to stop sharing and then I'll reshare with your slides, Shawn.
Sounds good.
While she's doing that, thank you, Gincy, for the resources you put in the chat in reference to live work units.
Very helpful. Well, we're ready. Do we have any quick questions for Eric? Burning questions?
Well, I have one just kind of, Eric, you mentioned y'all are generally over programmed for retail space. Have y'all considered trying to retrofit or allow underperforming retail to be redeveloped into residential? Obviously, Assembly Row is kind of an example of that. A very large site, though, not necessarily a small sort of strip commercial retail sites, but is that on the radar for you all?
Yeah, it is. We have recently just allowed townhomes and patio homes just by right in retail zoning. So folks can come in just with a redevelopment plan and they don't even need to do zoning. So we've allowed them by SUP for many years, but and we've had a lot of SUPs approved, but I think we're just now trying to really push forward and say, hey, please bring us in something other than retail.
Very interesting.
Thanks, Eric. Thank you, Sydnee. Okay, I'll go through this fairly quickly, but you will all be receiving a follow-up email once we have the slides posted on our website, along with the video of the meeting. So definitely open to any additional questions or feedback you have. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about COG's mixed-use development activities. Next slide. The Regional Transportation Council, COG, has adopted the Sustainable Development Policy that really governs our policies. It's on the Sustainable Development team. And this incorporates system capacity, improving rail mobility, improving access management, and of course, promoting mixed-use development. Mixed use is really a large component of this policy. And you can see in this Venn diagram, kind of the sweet spot of all of these different aspects is the infill mixed use with rail access is something we really try to promote, support, facilitate, and educate about through our work, as well as, of course, mixed use from the rail and infill rail. Next slide, please. As far as our kind of overall role in mixed use development, we are looking to support walkable, livable environments that are safe and comfortable for bicyclists, pedestrians, and transit users. Responding to the demand for different types of development that we know is out there. Sometimes that means talking about policies and regulation, zoning. Sometimes that means supporting through funding, but we try to support the demand that we know is there for mixed use, compact development, full development, transit-oriented development. And then we, of course, also focus on the transportation and land use aspects of mixed use, the connections between different uses, impacts of these types of development, access for residents to daily needs, to employment, and parking. What is kind of the right size for parking that's not too much, not too little for mixed-use development, transit-oriented development. Next slide. And just generally benefits and challenges of mixed use. I think we've covered some of this, but overall supporting walkable environments, economic vitality, supporting revitalization, location efficiency, as in making it very accessible for residents to access, uses for everyday uses, employment. Some of the challenges we've also heard about, achieving the best mix of uses, and that could be a challenge in terms of what do we want to establish versus what can the market support? Zoning requirements and building codes, we've heard about some of that as well. Having the public buy-in, affordable housing can be a challenge because of some of the vagaries of building mixed-use development can make it a little bit more pricey, and for some other reasons. Project longevity, so maintaining a good mix of uses over time, and then of course the parking requirements. Next slide. So a few activities that we're involved in at NCTCOG Sustainable Development Team. One of the major ones for a long period of time has been the Sustainable Development Funding Program. A fair number of you may be aware of this program or even have projects funded through this program. This program funds construction of bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure and in the past planning that supports mixed use development. We don't have land use authority. We're not requiring anyone to build mixed use, but this is the way that we have tried to incentivize mixed use in the region. We've had 3 calls for projects and a funding initiative. We've funded more than 50 projects for almost $200 million. So there is a QR code there for an interactive map if you'd like to delve into where some of those projects are and get some more information about those. Next slide, please. We also just recently put together a walkable places inventory. We actually presented this at a meeting last year, and we did draft mapping of walkable places throughout the region, and this included a number of different considerations for what we considered a walkable place, including, of course, the mix of uses, as well as building form, orientation, density, and then the street and sidewalk context. We mapped 143 places, and this originated out of a Walk Up, Wake Up study that we completed with George Washington University back in 2019. We've asked cities to provide feedback. We still have this map live. We have the link there. Still open to comments. If you want to check that out and give us any feedback, if you think there's additional walkable places we might consider, please let us know. Slide. And then currently what we're involved in is a regional mixed use study. So this came out of a request back in December of 2020 by Collin County and the major cities of Collin County. Overall purpose is to assess the traffic impacts of mixed use development and developing tools and data to support mixed use. And the background of this is that cities of Collin County were, they came to us wondering how they could go about making mixed use a little bit more palatable to the public, given concerns about density, concerns about traffic, because mixed use can take some time to achieve that really ideal mix of uses, given the vagaries of the market and other issues that are associated with that. It can take time for things to happen and seeing those benefits coming out of mixed use. So how do we kind of, how can cities justify this and be able to support these developments to the council and the public? They've also worked with developers who have submitted mixed use projects, worked with the city on mixed use projects that may not always be considered real strong candidates for mixed use, but are kind of proposed as those and trying to be able to garner the benefits of proposing a mixed use project. And so how can they have better conversations with those developers during the development process? Is there tools, information that they can have to be able to support those conversations and result in the type of development that they're really envisioning for the city? So that's what this project is about. We have this divided into two phases. Right now, we're just starting on a pilot study for focusing on Collin County, and then we'll be scaling that up to a regional study once we've completed the pilot. Next slide, please. We've started a mixed use inventory of mixed use projects in Collin County. That's based on the walkable places mapping as kind of launching point, and then had other considerations for this inventory. Next slide, please. And then these are the projects that we've identified thus far in Collin County as mixed use projects as part of that inventory. And we've just presented this to the cities for feedback. Next slide, please. And then we also developed this draft mixed use typology. And this is really getting at the difficulty of defining what is mixed use. It's on a spectrum. There are many things that people may call mixed use that may mean very different things. So as far as developing a study in this area, we need a good definition and we need a good unit of study. So this is part of the effort to identify what those would be. And this really looks at a spectrum from more dense, more integrated uses, a smaller geographic area, over to less dense, less integrated uses, a larger geographic area, and beginning to divvy up or categorize different types of mixed use projects in a way that we can hopefully get to some good definitions and good units of study. I won't go through these right now in the interest of time, but again, this will be posted on our website. And the examples you see here on this typology are from Collin County, because we are working on the pilot for Collin County right now. But ultimately, this is going to be a regional study, and you will be continuing to evolve the typology. So we would be very happy to hear from any feedback that you all might have on this. If you would like to get a hold of us. Next slide, please. So mixed use next steps. We have the mixed use regional study, of course, that we're working on now. We'll be having a report out of that pilot study with lessons learned, results, and then identifying funding to scale this up to the region. We will continue evaluating mixed use benefits and challenges and supporting those efforts, facilitating efforts, providing technical assistance to support and facilitate mixed use development in the region. Thank you, everybody. You can contact us with any questions or feedback.
Okay. Well, Shawn, we only got about 5 minutes until 4 o'clock. So I think we're gonna go through the announcements real quick. That works for everybody. Let's get those on everyone's radars. Sydney, I think you're our first up on a couple quick announcements.
I am. Really quick, everyone. We are excited to announce that we've recently completed a community gardens public program guide, which is meant to be a resource for our local governments in the region who may be interested in establishing a community gardens program. The guide encourages the use of surplus government properties, ideally located near multimodal transportation, for community garden sites as a way of increasing access to healthy foods, especially in places like food deserts. Some of the components of the guide are an overview and history of this project, how it came about, as well as a review of some of the programs that community gardens programs in the region, and a potential community garden site analysis. This analysis, we identified the most ideal properties across the core 4 counties, which you can see through our interactive map, and that is available at the QR code on this slide. If you'd like to view the guide, that's available at the first link on the slide, and we'll include these in a follow-up email as well. My second announcement is regarding a pilot placemaking workshop that we'll be hosting on August 22nd from 10 to 12. We're going to provide an overview of our pilot placemaking guide that we're currently developing, host a webinar about tactical urbanism, and feature various placemaking programs and projects. If you're interested in registering, please scan that QR code on the slide or visit the link on this slide. And those are my announcements. I'll pass it to Travis.
Thanks, Sydney. So this is just a quick announcement that our region has been successful in winning some very big federal grants. The RAISE Award, which is Rebuilding American Infrastructure Sustainably and Equitably. We were awarded $25 million for a trail on parts of the Silver Line in Plano and Richardson. So that's going to be built by DART. DART actually is the entity that won that. And then, as Kelly mentioned earlier, a grant that's been submitted a few times is retrofitting Lancaster Avenue to be a complete street along with some transit enhancements. So some big projects coming to the council governments. Now, Sydney, if we go to the next slide, the reason I bring this up is because you too, as an entity, a city, local government, can participate in getting a federal grant award to advance transformative projects in your community. One that's coming up real quick is the multimodal project discretionary grant opportunity. These are really big, large projects, very large in scale. And if you're pursuing one of these, it'd be great if you let us know, because COG is also working on some grants there and can assist. More related to walkable communities, bikeable communities, and what we do here. The Reconnecting Communities and Neighborhoods grant has funding eligible for a lot of the things that work with mixed-use development, coordinated land use transportation. A little more time to apply for that. Again, if you're interested and you want to work with COG, we're happy to chat with you. So a couple of ideas out there if you're looking for large amounts of funding for transformative projects from the federal side. Okay, Sydney, last announcement, real quick. You may remember a few months ago, we talked about value capture for transportation, and we were working on a report. Well, we completed that report. It is on our website there at that URL. It'll be on our slides that we share later. And this just covers how we're using value capture tools like tax increment financing, public improvement districts, roadway impact fees, and more to pay for various transportation improvements and kind of look at those trends and patterns in the North Texas region. A lot of interesting insights from that analysis there. So check that out. And I believe that is all we've got for announcements. Meeting slides will be posted on our website, and we'll have another meeting on October 19th. So details coming soon. And with that, Shawn, any other things you want to mention?
Let's see, we do have one more question in the chat. We've got 1 minute. But they're essentially asking if if anybody has incentivized adding green roofs to their developments, or if they have any incentives for. do you see a response from Eric? Basically,
Yeah, I think it's
we-
an interesting question. So if folks have done that, I'd be curious to know as well. We've talked about doing open space on roofs in parking garages, things like that. Haven't had really any success in getting green roofs established, but if others have, I'd be interested to hear, see those examples. Good question.
that is a good question, and we're starting to do more work in the realm of green infrastructure. So that's great to hear about. That's something that we may want to delve into a little bit more.
I'll also give a plug for our Environment and Development Department at COG. For those folks on the phone who are not familiar with that, we're in the Transportation Department and Environment Development, who we coordinate with, may have some resources on that as well. So I think we'll possibly send out a link to their main page or something like that. But yeah, I think that we're at 4 o'clock, so I thank everyone for joining us. And if you can think of topics like green roofs, I'm not sure that we'll dive into that, but others related to land use and transportation, feel free to send myself, Sydnee, Shawn, an email with your suggestions. We'd be happy to look at those topics and bring this up to our land use transportation task force. So, all right, everyone have a good afternoon, and thank you for participating.
Yeah.